Randy Short is a member of Dignity Human Rights and Peace Organization who joins us from Washington. Randy Short, we are seeing this the second day of the Israeli attacks on the Gaza Strip causing civilian casualties, and of course the most recent being that in retaliation there's a rocket fire coming from the Gaza Strip hitting Tel Aviv. What did Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu hope to achieve with what was obviously his escalation by killing that and assassinating the top Hamas military official, al-Jabari?
Well, it's an electoral season in Israel. He's very unpopular. And I guess the one way he can get people to like him is to martyr innocent Palestinians, because there's a high level of hatred of Palestinians in Israel. It's comparable to how elections are run in the United States, where a politician appeals to racism of the larger majority of whites as a means to get votes. But Netanyahu is a failure as prime minister in Israel. But the one thing that he and other persons can do when you have a politician in trouble is start a war.
Well, let's look at some of the opposition coming from, in particular, some of the left-wing politicians there in Israel. And it's quite telling. This particular politician by the name of Zehava Galan said that the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Ehud Barak are pyromaniacs who embarked on the operation for the purpose of re-election, as you stated. And they further added that assassinations are not the answer, which is a sentiment that is held by many Israelis. I mean, is this the extent that the Prime Minister would take Israel to, of what we're seeing right now, that the rocket fire has reached the heart of Israel in terms of it reaching Tel Aviv?
Well, you know, for me, it's lamentable that we're concerned just about when rocket fire hits Tel Aviv. The Palestinians have been bombed since time immemorial. The Lebanese have been bombed. People are being bombed all over by the bellicose Israeli military-industrial complex that doesn't want peace but wants a greater Israel at the expense of peace with its neighbors. So how many Palestinians or Lebanese or others have to be murdered by the state of Israel before one day the people in turn meet violence with violence? It's unfortunate. I don't want anyone fighting, but how much longer will people suffer from being bombed with white phosphorus and tanks and children being sniped at and harassments at the checkpoints before someone decides to fight back?
Let's bring in author and political scientist Kaveh Afrasiabi, who joins us from Boston, get his views on this. Kaveh Afrasiabi, put this into perspective for us, what we are seeing, the most recent being the rocket hitting Tel Aviv, and of course what we're looking at in terms of the region, of which some countries such as Egypt have come out saying that this will have regional consequences.
Well, unfortunately, the trend seems to be in that direction, and we may be on the verge of seeing a wider war that is clearly provoked by Israel and its hawkish prime minister, who is up for re-election and has used this opportunity to whip up the sentiments in Israel by provoking unilateral attack on Gaza that has elicited this kind of response. The Palestinian response by, raining rockets on Israelis and hitting Tel Aviv, I think represents an escalation that may be triggering a ground assault on Gaza in the days to come. And hopefully that will not happen, and the international community will condemn Israel's atrocities. But my fear is that we may be on the verge of witnessing such a negative development.
Well, when we look at, for example, what Egypt has said, and also Russia has made this statement, is that something that is coordinated by Israel with, for example, the U.S.? Because the timing of this really is also significant, looking at the re-election of Barack Obama just a few days or a week after that. Is this something that Israel perhaps has done in coordination with the U.S.? Because they, after all, with what is going on in Syria, as one of the countries in the bloc of resistance, Hamas spells one of the actors in the resistance bloc.
Well, although we don't know the full details, we can fairly assume the existence of such a coordination between U.S. and Israel, and usually based on past history, we know that Israel at least informs the officials in Washington of its warmongering intentions before they happen, and we had events in 2006 and then later on in Gaza, and now today it's clear that they really want to exploit the situation and the instabilities in the area to gain the upper hand, and there are growing concerns about the lack of movement on Middle East peace process. So instead of a proactive step on breaking that deadlock, the Israeli warmongering government has resorted to outright acts of violence against the defenseless Palestinians in Gaza.
Okay, thank you. Kaveh Afrasiabi, their author and political analyst. Caleb Mopin is from the International Action Center, and he joins us from New York. Caleb Mopin, an escalation of what we are witnessing right now, based on Israel's attacks on the Gaza Strip, of which over 200 airstrikes is reported in some cases. And here we have now Tel Aviv being hit, as the Israeli army has said, in two areas in Tel Aviv. How do you see things?
I see this as the Palestinian people defending themselves. This is an all-out attack, and it's just a continued attack. Since Israel's been created, the policies have been designed to eliminate the Palestinian people, to systematically destroy them. It's been a policy of murder over and over and over again, and every time the Palestinian people defend themselves, they're accused of being terrorists. Israel are the terrorists, if you look at what they've done for the last 50 years. So, this attack, they're defending themselves. They absolutely have the right to do it. And it's really a shame that the people of the world that so many of the Western powers are backing Israel and its continued policies. It's also very obvious that what we're seeing now was they waited until after the U.S. election to do it. The U.S. election, they waited, and it serves that Israel is a tool of the U.S. imperialists. Israel serves the U.S. imperialists, the bankers and the corporations in the United States, and their efforts for global domination. And they waited until after the U.S. elections in order to carry out this attack. The Palestinian people have the absolute right to defend themselves against this attack, and people need to recognize that. Israel is trying to destroy Palestinians, is trying to murder them, has carried out that policy, and that they have the right to resist and to defend themselves by any means necessary.
Thank you very much. Caleb Mopin there from the International Action Center from New York. And again, live images that you're seeing from Tel Aviv. Some updates there. The Israeli army spokesperson saying we're not going to have a quiet night. According to the statements coming from Israel, Tel Aviv has been hit twice by Palestinian rockets. That number could be higher, given the fact that hours earlier in the day, Israel even rejected the fact that rockets had hit Tel Aviv, but they admitted to it about an hour ago. And of course, now we're saying that they are relaying that through the Israeli media, as you can see there, indicated by them. And of course, the rockets hitting Tel Aviv is the breaking news that we're giving to you right now on Press TV. Well, let's talk about this more with Caleb Mopin, who is still with us. Caleb Mopin, it is unfair that there's only one side of the story that has been portrayed, and the analysts are really many pointing out to how the media is not looking at both sides of the story. They don't indicate the fact that Hamas was a democratically elected government there in the Gaza Strip. They don't talk about how this siege, which is going on for 5 years, has caused immense suffering, choking the Palestinian livelihood. They don't talk about the UN report that says Gaza is not going to be livable by 2020. And of course, the sole cause of this has been Israel. Isn't that unfair? And why has the media failed in revealing the truth as they're supposed to?
The media has failed because the media in most of the world is private property. It is owned by capitalists, by owners, by bankers largely, and they project the views that they want to spread. The media consistently gives Israel's side of the story and lies on Israel's behalf and never talks about the situation the Palestinians are living in. It is almost as if they don't count. The Zionist ideology, which is the ideology of the Israeli settlers and of many of the bankers, it says that if you're not Jewish, you're not a human being. It is pushed. It's an ideology that pushes for death of millions of Palestinian people, and that's the ideology that seems to dominate the media. And people in the U.S. need to realize they do not have an interest in the U.S. backing Israel. It is to their detriment. The U.S. backing Israel gives Israel $80 million every day so it can continue to murder people. And that's while they're cutting schools, they're cutting food stamps programs, they're cutting education, they're cutting the libraries. There's mass cuts everywhere, but Israel continues to get money. And what does that money go to? It goes to murdering Palestinian people, destroying them, and there's a media campaign to go with it. People need to stand against Zionism, which is another form of racism that says that the Jews are superior to other people and have the right to murder people and get away with it. We need to stand against the bankers and the U.S. imperialists who promote Zionism around the world. And we need to support the Palestinian people and recognize that just like any other people, when they're under attack, when people are trying to murder them and trying to wipe them out, they have the right to defend themselves. It's not a two-sided issue. It's not calling for peace. People say if you just call for peace, no. We're calling for the Palestinians to have the right to return, the right to exist, and we're telling that Israel is the problem here. It's not a two-sided conflict. Israel is the enemy of so many people in the Middle East and so many people around the world for what they've done.
Thank you very much, Caleb Maupin from the International Action Center. Well, Israel's attacks on the Gaza Strip are causing a wave of popular anger. In Egypt, there will be a million-man march planned for Friday. Mass anti-Israeli rallies are also planned in Tunisia and in Yemen. And in London, protesters are due to gather outside the Israeli embassy to show their anger against Tel Aviv. Press TV correspondent Hassan Al-Khatib is outside the Israeli embassy, and he joins me now to tell us what is happening there. Hassan, over to you.
Yes, hello there. I'm outside the Israeli embassy here. This is an emergency demonstration which has been taking place all over Britain, and this is the one in London. As you can see, there's a huge police presence. Barriers have been put up place, double barriers, because they expect the crowd here to be very angry, and understandably so, because the crowd here have seen the images and others who have been indiscriminately killed, and now they have obviously to face in trying to convince. They don't want to repeat what happened 4 years ago. Many were killed, 1,400. They're calling on their community to do something quickly. Obviously, the is very, very strong, and if you look at the British, the BBC website headline.
Okay, it seems like we're having some audio problems with our correspondent there, Hassan Al-Khatib. We'll try to get back to him in later bulletins to find out more about the protests that are taking place in London outside the Israeli embassy. Let me bring Randy Short, member of the Dignity, Human Rights and Peace Organization, back into the conversation. He joins us from Washington. Randy Short, last time around at the turn of 2008, Operation Cast Lead really devastated the Gaza Strip. They're still suffering from it to this day. And one of the biggest, we can say, weaknesses that showed its face were Arab countries who were not proactive. Can we see anything happening given the new landscape? In particular, many eyes are focused right now on Egypt and its President Mohamed Morsi.
Well, they should focus their eyes on Jordan as well. I think that we have Arab countries, but we don't always have leadership that has the interests of the masses of people at heart. The king of Jordan doesn't speak Arabic. It reminds me of certain people who used to rule Egypt that didn't speak Arabic until you had Nasser. I think that what's happening in Egypt is promising. I also think that the rage about what's happening in Syria and the potential of a regional war, because you have these proxy crooked sheikdoms and others serving the interests of NATO, the United States, and the globalists, people are tired of them. I think that this is one time that it's not going to be favorable to be a despot in the Middle East as the people wake up. There are movements all over sweeping the Middle East, especially in the Shia belt, where people are not going to be denied their rights anymore. And I simply want to say that also there's a disarray now with the CIA and the United States out of whack as they scramble to get new leadership. So this is an interesting time that you've got an uneven transition and the agency that more or less tries to police the rest of the world, and this attack on Gaza and the people fighting back. And also I want to say the cowardice that the people haven't attacked Hezbollah. It's interesting that Netanyahu knows that they can't go back into Lebanon without losing something. They're facing a situation where it's no longer asymmetrical warfare, but if you're aggressive against the people of Lebanon, it may come at a life for life, versus the '67 war where a few hundred Israelis died and thousands of Egyptians were slaughtered.
I'd like to address this also to Kaba Afrasiabi, who rejoins us. Kaba Afrasiabi, we are looking really at even some of the headlines domestically in the United States are reading, Obama works to prevent Israel-Egypt break amid what is going on. Are we going to see Egypt and its President Mohamed Morsi perhaps being the two players, or is it going to be just Egypt as a possibility to prevent this from escalating any further?
Well, I think that Israel can put its enormous weight in the region, and a firm reaction by some Egyptian politicians against the Israeli attack on Gaza should serve notice that the old era is over, and now we're dealing with a new reality that reflects a shifting balance of forces, and the Israeli politicians better start reckoning with that. Because it's not even in their own self-interest to provoke such senseless wars and murder innocent people and so forth in the face of disgust with the international community. If I may, with respect to one of your previous questions, I think that the reason why you don't find a lot of outrage in the Western community against such things is because of the manipulation by the pro-Israeli media. And the repression of Palestinians by Israel also extends against those who dare to defend the Palestinians in the West. And I have a personal experience with that, with repeated backlashes against me for daring to speak for the rights of Palestinians, and I'm subjected to political persecution in the United States as a result of that. And I think that's an important factor to remember. This is really repression that extends beyond its border, targeting those who speak for the rights of repressed Palestinians.
Randy Short, the question of the timing, again, is pretty significant. It's hard to imagine, based on some accounts, that Israel had not planned this for a while. We could look at different scenarios, but what is your take on why Israel has decided to do this at this time, given the different things that are going on? You mentioned, of course, the U.S., the re-election of Barack Obama, which I mentioned before, and also given the fact of what is going on in Syria. I mean, is there a possibility that Israel has another goal, aside from their elections coming up, behind what they're doing here, their assault on the Gaza Strip?
Yes. I want to say this. Do you remember Monica Lewinsky, the woman that had the cigar you know where with Bill Clinton, who was introduced to Bill Clinton by Rahm Emanuel, the current mayor of Chicago? I'm not picking if I say that Monica Lewinsky is Jewish. And what happened was that disrupted what Clinton had planned to do with the Middle East when this happened. Then, if I mention, I believe this woman who's involved with Petraeus, her father's last name is Krantz, and I'm wondering if this is another setup where you had Mossad or some group interject a woman into the life of an important person to either spy or get information to send it back to Israel, because Petraeus had written a 64-page document denouncing America's relationship with Israel, that it wasn't the most important ally. Now with this man gone, it's a way to threaten people who are American firsters in the Pentagon, in the CIA, or wherever, that if Israel wants to go to war, they've undermined those people who might resist them, who can't be called anti-Semites because they're American soldiers. Now they're removing the layers of restraint. And I believe the timing now is to force Obama to comply with his promise that he would support Israel no matter what. So if Israel starts a war, Bibi is using this possibly as a way to force Obama to go after, to get more involved in Syria more rapidly, as well as, of course, go after Iran. This is what Netanyahu wants, and he's gotten rid of through this trick that they've run on Petraeus. And this extends all the way to the White House. And in particular, there's another thing that threatens Obama. This woman who was having this affair with Petraeus is mentioning that the CIA is torturing and killing black Libyans and other black Africans in Benghazi, which will certainly help hurt Obama's image with the African Americans who voted for him, 93%. I'm glad I wasn't one of them. So there's a point where there's a triangulation of forces to make Obama support Netanyahu, who he doesn't like, by getting rid of those persons who had helped Obama resist going to war, even though he's imposed one vicious, illegal, genocidal sanction after the other against the Islamic Republic of Iran, as well as trying to destroy the righteous nation of Syria.
Kavafir Sabi, let's get your reaction on some of the reactions that have been placed. And one of the most interesting ones I find is the one that came from Qatar, in which the Prime Minister, Sheikh Hamid bin Jassim Al Thani, has said Israel's use of force against Palestinians should not go unpunished. I'm curious to get your reaction on that. I'm more curious if countries like Qatar or Saudi Arabia or Turkey, if they feel as such, would supply perhaps arms to Hamas, as they are doing to insurgents inside Syria, if they feel this strongly about what Israel is doing against Palestinians in the Gaza Strip.
If you recall, some weeks ago, the Turkish Prime Minister Erdogan announced that he has a plan to go to Gaza, and this was met by a very negative reaction in Israel. And so, there were things starting to happen with respect to Gaza that Israelis tried to offset by provoking this unnecessary war in order to, shift momentum in their own favor. And I don't think they're going to succeed. And we see the reaction even by the conservative Arab states who have been focusing on Syria, and now, they're changing their focus on Israel instead. So if Israel's intention has been to galvanize international support for its policy against Iran and so on and so forth, it is clearly backfiring. And that is why you see some left-wing politicians in Israel questioning the wisdom of such hawkish policies by Benjamin Netanyahu that's not serving even Israel's own interests.
Randy Short, looking at Hamas, we can't forget one fine detail, in that Hamas, the parent company, so to speak, is the Muslim Brotherhood, of which, of course, Mahmoud Morsi came out from there, becoming the president of Egypt. So I would think that there's going to be this strong support by Morsi for Hamas. The question is, to what extent?
Well, he needs to open the border at Rafah. Let's cut the talk and put up and rescue the people who are being victimized, who are facing slow genocide. I mean, if he's serious, do it now. Open the border at Rafah now. And all I want to say is they had planned to destroy Hamas before they got elected. This is something that was engineered by Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice and Mahmoud Abbas back in September 2008. If we know this, why won't they do everything that they can to support the people of Gaza? They need freedom, they need food, they need self-determination, they need their seat at the UN, and we need to deal with countries like Turkey that are Israel's best friend. They do symbolic things, but they need to put up or shut up. Whose side are they on? Are they on the side of the people in Gaza and Ramallah, or are they on the side of Netanyahu? I'm not clear.
Well, hopefully tomorrow we'll find that out when we have what is expected to be a million-man march in Tahrir or Liberation Square. As usual, Egyptians are going to come out and they're going to find out if their president is going to be behind that. Kaveh Afri-Sabi, back to the U.S. The U.S., I would think at this point, President Barack Obama is probably somewhat worried about the Israel and its peace accord with Egypt. Wouldn't that mean that Obama needs to step in, or the U.S. needs to step in order to prevent any damage to that? Because aside from that, Israel could also lose a lot, which with regards to Egypt, and that is, for example, Egypt's gas sales to Israel. So we're going to see perhaps the U.S. president stepping in and trying to save this relationship that Egypt has with Israel, which is the peace accord.
Exactly, and this is a conflict that can easily spiral out of control. The U.S. government needs to rein in on Israel to put a stop to this madness. I don't think that is going to happen, however, and the timing of this provocation by Israel indicates their sinister objective of basically dragging the United States behind them to back them up in this assault on Palestinians and their rights, the policy of systematic exterminism. And the U.S., because of the role of the lobby groups and so forth, will probably toe the line. I think that President Obama is probably worried about this and doesn't want this to get out of hand. Nevertheless, I think his hands are somewhat tied, and then he will sheepishly follow, whatever Israel is perpetrating against Palestinians. Hopefully I'm wrong, but I'm very skeptical about Washington's ability to, put pressure on Israel effectively and bring it into line with demands of peace.
Let me remind our viewers, Kaveh Afri-Sabi, do stay with us of what they're looking at right now in case they're wondering. These are the latest pictures that have come through showing Israel's capital, Tel Aviv. There are people there on the ground is the sign of them wanting to take cover because based on reports, at least that Israel has admitted to, which they hadn't prior, is that the rocket fire has reached Tel Aviv, something that has not happened between the Gaza Strip and Israel in terms of any previous exchanges that have been made. At this point, the Israeli Army radio has said not only that the rocket have hit Tel Aviv, but also that they have hit 2 locations inside Tel Aviv. That number could be higher. We're looking for reports to see how many have actually hit Tel Aviv based on any indications coming from perhaps either Hamas or its military wing. So we're going to wait to see how many they say they have hit onto Tel Aviv. But there you can see the Israelis taking cover there. And Kaveh Afri-Sabi, I'm wondering how this is going to really reflect on Israelis inside, in particular Tel Aviv, when they're looking at the Prime Minister to have obviously pushed this escalation by pounding the Gaza Strip. Again, the latest reports a couple hours back were 200 airstrikes, not to mention the artillery fire that was coming from the sea. So isn't that going to negatively affect the Israelis and in turn their views on the Prime Minister?
Most likely it will, and we see the early indications of that. I happen to add that I find the UN Security Council's silence on atrocity quite scandalous and unjustifiable. I think there should be a swift UN condemnation of the Israeli attack on the people of Gaza. And unfortunately, because of the U.S. role, that is not happening. And inside Israel, we know that Mr. Netanyahu has been quite unpopular with his own people, the likelihood of losing the election. So this has been, a ploy, election ploy on his part in order to reverse the momentum and increase his chance of the election. But my hunch is that this is going to backfire, and more of the Israeli voters are going to turn against him in a bid for peace.
And Kaveh Afrasiabi, when we look at, and this needs to be pointed out because really the lack of it has been so evident, and that is what the Gaza Strip has experienced. And in particular, if you want to look at the government that was elected there by the Gazans, Hamas, of which they never had a chance to really flourish, because ever since they came to power, sanctions, them being called the terrorist organizations, pretty much choking any kind of accomplishments that they could show in the Gaza Strip has been stopped. And of course, the siege by Israel has pretty much stopped them from doing that. But that doesn't get reflected too often. And that's something that the general public is somewhat unaware of when we look at the Western general public and how the media is broadcasting the situation to them.
Yeah, unfortunately, that is the fact in the United States. If you look at the CNN headlines on this issue right now, you see that they're trying to portray an image of Israel reacting to the rocket fire, when we know that, they're basically reversing the role of cause and effects here. And, this kind of media manipulation of facts on the ground in the Middle East happens all the time. And, we witness what Professor Noam Chomsky refers to as manufacturing consensus and the related political apathy with respect to a flagrant act of war that targets the whole population for systematic dismantling of their rights and their privileges. And, you mentioned yourself the UN report and the uninhabitable conditions of Gaza, and one can only imagine the exponential increase in the suffering of the people in the Gaza Strip as a result of this military campaign launched against them by the warmongering Israeli government. And there should be a huge international outcry against this and swift condemnation by the European Union and so forth. And yet we see, a numbing silence instead, which is totally unacceptable from the point of view of international ethics and international norms.
Thank you very much, Kaveh Afrasiabi. Do stay with us. Let me bring in Adi Mormick, who is a human rights activist who joins us from the Gaza Strip. Adi Mormick, it's becoming very dangerous and it's going from bad to worse. We just heard that Israeli fire has hit Gaza City, a series of what has been described by some news wires as raids happening in Gaza City. This would be air raids. What are you witnessing where you are?
Yeah, there's been heavy bombing. It's been going on all day. There hasn't been a lull. There's been periods where it's been one after the other. We were actually at Shifa Hospital today, where every 10 minutes the ambulance was coming in to Shifa, and there's a mass crowd, a mass struggle, and then they bring out the person who it is, and almost every time was either an elderly or children who were being brought out of the ambulances. I'm getting lots of reports from friends all over Gaza Strip when they're saying they've got neighbours attacked, they've got neighbours lost their homes, neighbours injured, and they're all civilians. And the injuries, the 90%, the vast majority are civilians. So they are hitting civilian homes, they're hitting civilian areas. I was in the intensive care unit when a little girl called Haneen Tafash came in, and she was being brought in on a small trolley, and she had no life in her whatsoever. She'd had a brain hemorrhage, a fractured skull, and she'd been attacked in Sabra. with an airstrike, and it was one of the most horrific things I've ever seen. And seeing them just lopping her head from side to side with no response. And this is across the board. Children are, as usual in Gaza, they're over half the population, and they are the victims. And it's a defenseless population that these attacks are against. And really, it's you're crying out for just some kind of understanding of what's going on, because if you're here and you see the carnage straight up, and you see the extent to which people are so hurt and so at a loss for the tragedy they've had to have again and again and again, and you'll realise that they deserve their due. They deserve to have the correct media response. And of course, they're trying to say that the Palestinians began this whole thing, when of course it was the 13-year-old Abu Dhaka that was killed playing football on the previous Thursday that began all of the violence. Not to mention the fact that the Palestinians have been the overwhelming victims yet again by these attacks, and yet you'd think it's only about these rockets, most of which land in open ground. It's total madness when the world's most advanced weaponry are being rained upon a civilian population in the Gaza Strip, and that is not the story. I mean, it's sickening, and it's a real smoke shield against what is just 60-odd years of Israeli aggression, occupation, and ethnic cleansing.
Let me bring in former U.S. Senate foreign policy analyst James Jatras, who joins us right now to get his opinion about what is going on here. James Jatras, if you, as your position states, were to look at this and analyze it, what are we looking at? I mean, aside from what has occurred, is this something pre-planned with intentions that perhaps are going to involve the region, or are we just looking at what Israel says is that we're reacting to the rocket fire coming from the Gaza Strip, and this is what we're witnessing in terms of their raids on the Gaza Strip?
I think we do have to. I think we do have to look at the big pictures. Certainly, of course, you have the specific Israeli response to the rocket attacks, and I think that needs to be looked at, as a discrete occurrence. But I think you have to put it into a larger context. Hamas is an arm of the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood. I don't know why Hamas would fire these missiles into Israel without realizing, and of course they do realize, that there will be an Israeli response. And given the difference in the sophistication of the weaponry and how densely populated the Gaza Strip is, that the human cost on the Palestinian side is going to be much greater than the effectiveness of targeting the Israelis. So the question then is, why do they do it? Why do they fire these missiles knowing what the response is going to be? And I would say it's precisely to have this kind of horrendous humanitarian cost that they can then point at and say, look, this is what the Israelis are doing. But I think then you put that into the larger international context of the complete failure of American policy in this region, not even on the specific question of a peace agreement between the Israelis and the Palestinians, but also having helped to power the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. We now see, for example, on Israel's border with Syria, that U.S.-supported jihadi groups are now taking control of the border area between Israel and Syria. How can that be a good thing for peace in the region? So I would say, yes, we do have this horrendous standoff, this exchange of fire between the Israelis and the Palestinians, of which predictably the Palestinians are getting the worst of it. But look at the big picture where things are also going from bad to worse.
Well, let's see what Adi Mormik can tell us, James Jatras. Adi Mormik, this needs to be highlighted, and I need to find out if it's even true, because some of the dead include, obviously, civilians, but here's a list of some of these civilians. A pregnant woman. Some reports indicate this pregnant woman was pregnant with twins. A 3-year-old girl, an 11-month-old baby boy, a 65-year-old man, a 7-year-old boy, and a 2-year-old boy who was injured but succumbed to his wounds. Are these facts true? Is that what we're seeing? And are we seeing mostly civilians bearing the brunt and causing, obviously, deaths and injuries amongst them?
For sure. If this gentleman would just actually spend some time in the hospitals, and he'd completely understand this. But I think it's sickening that he can say that Palestinians can't respond. Basically, there's an open-air prison here, which is actually what the British Prime Minister called it. And this is collective punishment, Article 33 of the Geneva Convention. And they're facing the world's longest modern military occupation. Now, these are huge crimes against humanity in themselves, and you have a right to resist. You have a right to resist violently against military occupation. It's illegal by international law. What is hugely illegal as well is whether it's extrajudicial killings or targeted assassinations. They're illegal. You're supposed to have a court and order to try people. But of course, the massacres of civilians and the injuries of 140 civilians, this is all complete and utter war crimes. These are crimes. You can't say, oh, Israel's bound to be brutal to you, so therefore, it's your fault. No, I'm sorry, but the brutality, Israel monopolizes the brutality. The overwhelming atrocities are from Israel. And if you look at the chronology, which this man fails to do, if we're going to talk about response, if we're going to even not bring in the horrific context of what the Palestinians are suffering, the first action was the Israeli killing of this 13-year-old. This is an act of war when you kill an innocent civilian from another country with a bullet from the border. And again, there was a few days before that, there was another man that was killed. There's injuries all the time. The fishermen are shot all the time. Now, these are continuous attacks where there's no responses. And so at some point, you would expect an imprisoned people to act, to strike out when they're being attacked. And it is a complete response to Israeli aggression. The occupation is aggression. The collective punishment is aggression. This man does not know the chronology of the events. And the same was true in March when 20 Palestinians were killed and 0 on the Israeli side. They initiated that. It was the first act of aggression. The same was true in June when over 20 Palestinians were killed, 70 injured, against 0 killed in June on the Israeli side. And yet you're trying to say that there's an exchange. You're trying to say that it's an Israeli response when it's always the Israelis that have attacked first, which is documented. If you would actually read and check out these deaths and this 13-year-old and his life and his mother and his family and what they've lost for the rest of their lives on a mass level, if you count all of Gaza, then you might actually see the chronology of events and see who's responding and who's responding to the wider crimes of occupation and colonization.
James Jatras, we have seen, obviously, the rocket fire come from the Gaza Strip, but now it has hit Tel Aviv. Israel has admitted to it. Is it a game changer? What can we expect now from Israel?
I think more of the same and probably even harder. I mean, I understand what the gentleman is saying, but if you put the thing if you pose the problem as one of occupation and aggression, and that the victims of occupation and aggression have an a priori right to engage in military resistance, he wants to call it, without an expectation that that resistance will have consequences, you're going to get exactly this thing that we see here. Let's be clear. When we talk about occupation or liberation and so forth, Hamas's position is that Israel should not exist at all, that the entire country of Palestine is occupied by the Israelis, and that, quote, resistance is, and that includes armed resistance, is justified until that entire liberation is accomplished. Obviously, that is not something that is going to be accepted in any way from the Israeli side. Unfortunately, like it or not, for the past half century and more, we have two peoples who have the claim to same parts of land in the Middle East, and they don't agree on what that solution should be, and the Israelis have the upper hand. If you're the weaker party militarily and you say, well, we have the right to resistance, we're going to fire these missiles, you cannot be surprised when it has horrendous consequences, especially given the demographic realities in Gaza. He talks about the woman who is pregnant with twins. Does he think the Israelis had some kind of secret scope to see she was carrying twins and then singled her out for killing on that basis? We saw the video of the Israeli strike on Ahmad Javari. From that scope, it looked like it was very, very well executed. Maybe other Israeli strikes aren't as well executed. But to take this simplistic point of view to say, well, we're the victims, we can resist, we can shoot missiles at you, but then we're very surprised and we will condemn you when you retaliate, I think is not conducive to any kind of solution to the problem overall.
The solution to the problem right now seems to be, James Jatras, in some respects, focused on Egypt's President Mohamed Morsi. He has promised to take a harder line on Israel, especially since he does have close ties with Gaza's ruling Hamas governments. What can we expect from Morsi in this case in terms of him or Egypt overall being more proactive? Or does this need to be coordinated, for example, with the United States or perhaps with other Arab countries? How do you see it?
It's a very complicated question because I think Mr. Morsi is playing a very complicated game. If Morsi did not want Hamas to be firing these missiles, I don't think these missiles would be firing. If Morsi is so concerned about the economic situation in Gaza and the fact that the Israelis keep Gaza essentially in a state of embargo, why doesn't he open up things on the Egyptian side? I don't think there's that much care on the part of Mr. Morsi or the Muslim Brotherhood about the human cost to people in the Gaza Strip. I think they're using them as a pawn for a larger game with respect to the Israelis. Now, maybe for the long term, they share the same goal, which is that Israel should not exist at all. And as I say, I think this suffering, this human suffering in Gaza is extremely useful politically for both Hamas and also for the Muslim Brotherhood in terms of their long-term goals. I don't think that the Egyptian peace treaty with Israel is going to be with us for a very long time. Morsi has been quite ambiguous about his intentions in that regard, and I think this is simply one card in a very long-term poker game that is designed to get to that ultimate outcome.
And you don't think that President Obama is going to step in and at least put some efforts forward to prevent any damage in this Israeli-Egypt peace accord?
Well, I assume he will put some kind of steps forward, and I expect them to be as utterly incompetent as everything else he has done in the region. As I've said on this program on earlier occasions, one of the fundamental features of American policy, but accentuated under this administration, is support for radical Sunni elements supported by Saudi Arabia. This is something that has been with us ever since the Afghan war against the Soviet Union. It certainly was the key to our policy in Libya, and it is also the essence of our policy in Syria. Now we seem to be surprised, just completely surprised, that the Muslim Brotherhood, whom we helped into power in Egypt at the expense of our former puppet, Hosni Mubarak, is playing a game that redounds to the benefit of other radical Sunni forces like Hamas. I'm sure the Obama administration and Hillary Clinton in her remaining days as Secretary of State will try to pull some kind of rabbit out of their hat, and I think predictably it will only aggravate the situation.
Let's bring in Adi Mormick back into the picture here. Adi Mormick, this is now the second day coming to an end of the missile fire or air raids, which also has been coming from the sea from Israel. You said you have been out on the streets in Gaza, and I believe you said you had mentioned going to a hospital. I need to get a better idea of what the Palestinians there, the ones that are injured, brought into the hospitals, what they're dealing with when they arrive there. I mean, are they equipped there? Are the doctors able to cope with some of the injuries? Because, well, hundreds, over 100 from what we had, are the number of injured at this point.
Certainly they're very stretched, and of course the electricity, if that's endangered as well, then that's another huge aspect. And we're hearing that they're short of anaesthetics, they're short of certain medications, they're short of the detergents as well, and simple things like gloves for use for the surgeons. But I just wanted to get back to the gentleman's point here. He was actually arguing that Palestinians shouldn't resist. Basically, they shouldn't resist military occupation. They shouldn't resist the collective punishment of Gaza. They shouldn't resist F-16s regularly flying over and bombing, whether there's rockets or not, regularly killing fishermen, regularly killing farmers, regularly killing people at the borders, regularly attacking and killing people within the Gaza Strip, whether there's rockets or not. And they're saying don't resist. It's saying don't fight back. It's like telling the blacks in South Africa not to resist apartheid, no matter how brutal. But of course they resisted, and Nelson Mandela was branded a terrorist for it. The same was true in many other conflicts around the world, the East Timorese against the Indonesians, and many others. and they were branded the same way. Don't resist. Of course you can resist. It's against what's happening to them is international crimes. They're massacres. It's crimes against humanity. There's an international law aspect to this. It's a definition. You can't accelerate your crimes. And by saying that if you take on a brute, then a brute's going to be horrific to you, is actually agreeing with all the biggest brutes throughout history. And there are some pretty grisly brutes that this man is finding himself aligned with by suggesting that if you can be brutal enough and if you're strong enough and you can kill lots of people, then there should be no resistance. Of course there'll be resistance. 2/3 of the people in Gaza are ethnically cleansed. They were violently forced off their land from within Israel. They've all got a village that they call their own in Israel, which is from where their family were forced out from, violently by the nascent Israeli army. Over half of the population are children. So what do you think they're doing in this kind of prison camp? We're going to look back on this with great shame when people like this are on television trying to advocate what's going on to the people of the Gaza Strip, having all that they've been through, which has been nothing but pulverizing, occupation and domination. And these are crimes. These are war crimes. These are crimes against humanity. The situation in Gaza is hugely bleak. It's chaotic in the hospitals. And really, people are just fearing for what's going to happen over the next few days because the hospitals are filling up. And there's huge amounts of injured, and the vast majority of the injured are civilians. They are elderly, they are children. I was speaking to a woman in there today. She started, when I asked her if she wanted to say anything to the world, she just broke down in tears. She was trying to say, we're just trying to live our lives. That is what Palestine is. That is what Gaza is. It's just people trying to live their lives with this huge Goliath and brutal regime that is right next to them, attacking them at will, and has always initiated these attacks, which is exactly the case for what happened here. And of course, again, by international law, people have a right to resist occupation. And this is the fact that people need to get their heads around as to who is the aggressor here. And Archbishop Desmond Tutu has said what Israel's doing is worse than apartheid. Well, everyone's got a right to resist apartheid, and everyone's got a right to resist the brutality that I'm seeing around me, and the amount of kids that are being lost and injured and maimed that is happening right now with the bombs that are going off every few minutes in Gaza Strip. It's terrorizing the entire entity of Gaza.
So those are very dismal, obviously, stats there, but something that Palestinians have been coping with, especially in the Gaza Strip.